Okay. So guys, we're up to the second layer of the iceberg. There's not really much need for any dilly-dallying, so let's get right on in. Plandemic. So from what I could find, this is mostly a trilogy of films made by Mikki Willis, and that this was mostly about misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic, alongside the basic idea that the pandemic was orchestrated by the ones in power. Now, in terms of the films, specifically talking about the first one, The Plandemic, The Hidden Agenda Behind COVID-19, which was released on May 4th, 2020, which became viral extremely quickly, and it actually became one of the main videos primarily in terms of COVID misinformation. And after it's released, it would be quickly removed by multiple platforms, but the damage was already done. And then the second film, Plandemic Indoctrination, would be released on August 18th that same year. And then the final film, Plandemic 3, The Great Awakening, would be released on February of 2023. And the first film would obviously gain a lot of attention, but the second one not as much, because social media companies were prepared this time around, so therefore they kind of blocked it from gaining any more attention than the first one. And to counter this, scientists and health professionals would criticize every single one of these films for misleading claims. And it's also been stated that Willis's filmmaking has kind of employed forms of persuasion, and therefore it would also be seen as brainwashing, which I will go over in just a minute. And apparently Willis would express doubts about Judy Mikovits, who was a discredited biochemist in the first film, but would still continue to defend her, saying, quote, "We're working very hard right now to validate the majority of the claims that were made." With Judy claiming that a mouse's endogenous retrovirus, which for those who don't know is a DNA sequence derived from a virus, and it basically copies itself into the RNA genome, and that she would link that to chronic fatigue syndrome, and that even before the pandemic, she would engage in anti-vax activism and kind of promote conspiracy theories around the vaccine. And that the synopsis of the film is basically the promotion that vaccines are used to make money and cause harm to everyday people. And there was also claims of loss of free speech and freedom of choice. And a ProPublica healthcare reporter would actually contact Willis, who would ask him if Plandemic would be fairly called propaganda, with him saying that the definition fits, but that he thinks that none of the information inside the film was misleading. And the second film would make the claim that the CDC, Google, and the fact-checking agencies, along with climate scientists, Bill Gates, and even John Oliver were involved in all this. Why the fuck is John Oliver in this? Why? And in the third film, Willis would actually team up with Del Bigtree, the founder of the anti-vax group Informed Consent Action Network. And the trailer would include out of context clips of world leaders and politicians discussing the Great Reset at the World Economic Forum, which of course we've already covered in the first layer, so we're not going to go into that. The film would also misleadingly depict Klaus Schwab as creating a purported plot for a unified world government, as well as being a Nazi just because he was born in Germany. Now, before I continue on, while I was doing research, obviously you know me in the past video, that I get extremely frustrated when it comes to misinformation and how some people aren't able to interpret certain information or are not able to fact check themselves. So I made a segment here in which I will cover brainwashing and stuff like that, but I will leave a timestamp so that way if you don't want to watch it, you can just skip right through it. So there's obviously no need for you guys to watch this section because it might be a little bit boring for you, but I'm doing it mostly to make myself feel better, and that way I cover all my bases and don't have to do it again in another video and explain how all that stuff works. So yeah. So in order to explain brainwashing, I need to go over what exactly it does before we move on. So brainwashing is the form of altering someone's state of thinking critically or thinking independently in order to introduce specific news or to give certain thoughts or ideas into someone's mind. And obviously you probably met some of those people or know some of those people who tend to say that we are the ones that are brainwashed, but my counter to that would be in how we engage with certain information. And when it comes to situations like COVID, CERNs, Illuminati, the ones who push this narrative tend to use fear or feelings that, one, you're not educated, or two, you don't bother to look up anything, and alongside that, they use it to make a profit on that vulnerability and to close you off from exploring any opposing opinions, and to basically close you off to make it unavoidable for you to get out of that headspace. And in order to understand manipulation, I'll kind of give an example, such as people saying that you are being put down by people in power and that they're using class warfare against you. And with them using vulnerabilities such as you having a low-paying job and feeling like those who are already in positions of power don't do anything to help you, in which is something that you'll already lean to, and that way it makes it easier for them to use fear or another reason to push you more into that side. And two perfect examples of those are those in the political sphere, so those of the extreme right of MAGA and those in the far extreme of the left, also known as tankies or imperialists, which I'm going to be using synonymously. With extreme MAGA pushing things like COVID misinformation, using fear and lack of education or understanding information, making you believe that the government or some higher form of power is either using you or weakening your ability to do anything. While tankies use class warfare and ex-US and Western colonialism, in which they now push the idea that a monopoly is happening where the dominant form of capital is being used by corporations, which then compete for control of natural resources and human labor, which then leads to the exploitation of that labor from other neighboring nations, and that kind of leads to more wealth for the rich, which then leads to a negative opinion of the Western nation, regardless of any good that comes from that system, in order to favor something more along the lines of socialism or even communism. Now, in order to counter those things, you need to think critically, and for that, we'll use Paul Elder's framework. And the frame for critical thinking is the intellectual standard that should be applied to that element of reasoning, the intellectual trait associated with a cultivated critical thinker that results from the constant and disciplined use of using the element of thought. And the element of thought and reasoning is to have a purpose for doing it, such as trying to figure something out, and that you're not just basing it on an assumption or from a point of view, that you're using data, information, or evidence to kind of express that concept, which will then be done to make an interpretation or an inference, which will then kind of lead you to drawing a conclusion, which could then lead to an implication to the point that you're trying to get to. So, obviously, if you have an opinion on something, you gather more information, so that way you're able to make a more rationalized idea, because all that information will lead to a better judgment of what that opinion might be on that specific subject. And there is a universal intellectual standard that you can use that is more simplified, so that way it's kind of easier to do an application, such as them asking for clarity. So if someone talks to you about something that's happening, you could say, can you elaborate? Can you give me more details? Or asking for accuracy and telling them, how can we verify that information? Or for precision is, how can we be more exact about that information, or where to find that? Another is relevancy in terms of how does that relate to the mass problem that you're having in that conversation or to that specific point. Another is depth in terms of how you are going to deal with the difficulties on the certain topic. And another is breadth, in which that one is more of you considering other points of view, not just accepting the thing that someone is telling you or from what your own opinion is. And obviously you use logic in order to use all the pieces that you gathered and basically put it together and see if it makes sense at all. Next would be the significance of that information and thinking that if that is the most important thing that you are trying to get from whatever you're talking about. And of course, there's the significance of that information, and then the fairness in which you need to be critical of yourself and seeing if you are judging it justly or not. Now, obviously, there's more information about this whole critical thinking system that the professor does. You can look that up yourself. In terms of the tools, hopefully you use these tools in the future if you need to see some information and then you kind of had doubts on it and you want to be more educated on something, or if you just want to be more educated in general, then the tools are there. But if you already use the tools, kudos to you. You are more informed than a majority of people who rather just take everything at face value than to go look it up themselves. But yeah, hopefully I'll never have to do this again. Hopefully. But in terms of that, yeah, I mean, in my personal life, I tend to do the same thing where obviously I follow people who tend to show information as best as they can if they can provide, documents or evidence leading to the conclusion that they made. And if I see someone or I hear someone talking about something, I tend to take it with a grain of salt, do more research on it, and then, depending on what I find, then I tend to lean one way or another. That's, getting the information before you make a decision. But yeah, that's my TED Talk. Hopefully you guys, make use of this little segment. And if you didn't, then I don't know, whatever. But yeah, without further ado, let's get on to the next one. The scariest movie ever. So there really isn't much to go on with this one, as there's multiple films that have conspiracies. So I'll probably go over a few. Just so you know, I got these all from Reddit, and it's mainly difficult to find anything on this one because the creator of the Iceberg didn't really give me much information to go on a lot of these. So just keep that in mind, that I'm trying my best and I'm going by deductions on what he might be implying. So just keep that in mind. With one of the more common theories is that The Exorcist used real disturbing footage and, rituals being involved in the film. And then there was a funny one on Reddit in which some said that Pennywise and Mary Poppins were the same species, except that Pennywise was obviously evil and Mary Poppins was basically the good version of Pennywise. And another being the Poughkeepsie tapes, in which it revolves around a serial killer murdering in Poughkeepsie, New York, in which through the interviews, the footage from the cache of the killer's snuff films, that the documentarian was actually behind the tapes and was a killer all along, that he was putting the footage together to basically use it as a form of showing without actually revealing himself. So there's that theory. Human meat in fast food. So this theory revolved around a claim that a video in 2014 about how McDonald's was actually using human meat in their burgers, and that more accurately, the meat was found in a freezer in an Oklahoma City McDonald's meat factory, as well as other 90 factories having human meat during the time of the reporting. And that the sites that initially reported the claims were Hustlers and a Facebook page called The Hidden Truth, in which that Facebook page has a history of pushing conspiracy theories. And obviously there's not much information on that conspiracy because obviously, as far as we know, there is no such thing as human meat in McDonald's, unless the Hamburglar is secretly prowling at night, looking at workers and saying, like, I'm about to give you the hamburger. Trees. Now, again, the creator didn't give me much to work with because it just says trees on the layer. So I had to take a guess and just think that he meant that trees weren't real. So that's what I'll be covering in this one. So this one revolves around flat earthers. Boom, shocker. The real trees don't exist anymore, and that what we have now are just basically cheap imitations of actual trees. And that according to them, these imitations are versions of giant 20-mile-high trees that used to exist in ancient times, and that what we have now are basically just bushes. With the origin of this idea being wide known by a Crimean YouTube channel back in 2006 with the title, "There Are No Forests on Flat Earth, Wake Up," with it gaining hundreds of thousands of views. With the examples they used in the video being the Devil's Lower Butte, or Butte, which I'm going to use Butte because it sounds more fancy, which is found in Arizona, and the Giant Causeway Basalt Cliff in Northern Ireland. Thank God I pronounced that. Jesus Christ. And the Uluru in Australia, and those being the actual remains of the ancient trees. Uluru. It's Uluru, or whatever. And that basically a mass disaster destroyed most of the Earth biosphere a long time ago, and that what we have now is basically, bushes and shrubs. In which the video, they do a side-by-side of tree stumps that look very similar to these geological locations, asking you to spot the difference, saying that you can't, and that the only difference is the material and the size. And you could probably look for the video and maybe find it, but the original is no longer available. But that definitely doesn't stop other people from spreading it around, different social media sites. And yeah, I can show pictures of those geological locations, but I remember when I was doing research, there was I believe a geological scientist that basically said that it is kind of idiotic for people to think that they are similar because, there's a difference between rock and a living organism. But I'm not going to go into that because, again, we have already had that TED Talk. We don't need to include another one. So next one. We are already in hell. And this is actually a pretty cool theory, as it revolves around the idea that we obviously live in hell because we tend to view hell as a place where souls are subjugated to punishment, suffering, and torture. And I guess it could make sense depending on your point of view, especially naming off these views that someone basically mentioned from somewhere, I forgot where, but they mentioned this. With birth being the first one, and how we are being brought into hell by other people, not really choosing to be born, and that growing up we will face some form of pain. And next would be life such as the consumption of animals or plants, and that basically results in us eating other souls from other creatures and all that jigamarole, and how basically We go through life developing a sense of evil. Now, of course, whether you choose to do any evil, that's obviously a personal choice. But, you kind of develop a sense of being able to be attracted by power, money, or the approval of your father, and such things as like how there can be too much of a good thing. And next would be death, which is something that we don't have more concrete evidence on what happens after, but that's basically how we have the aversion of death, how we don't like to think of dying, how we try to avoid it, and how we like living. And that kind of gives into more of the idea that it might not be a good thing when we die. But in terms of theory, this one is really fun. I like this one. This is one of the top tier ones, just because if you have that kind of set of mind, then perhaps you can kind of see it. I can kind of see it, even though I don't have that kind of mentality of like I'm suffering through it things, because I feel like, at least me personally, I'm enjoying life. I'm having fun. But yeah, for those people, that is very, very depressing for those types of people who believe in that conspiracy. But it is still fun. It's still fun. World Corp. So this one can be disturbing to some people, so I'm just going to give you a fair warning before we kind of move on in. Now, this one was hard to find at first during my initial search, which would lead me to World Corp Enterprise, and I genuinely thought that they were just like a music group that just didn't exist anymore, so I was a bit confused and I decided to keep on digging. And I would actually be able to find more information from Mutahar, because he posted a video back in 2019, and that was able to give me a more closer look at exactly what World Corp was. And from the synopsis from Genius, it would actually mention how they were created back in 2015, and that their original website contains some pretty weird stuff. In going over what Muta found in his video, he would basically go into the dark web and find World Corp Network back in 2017, which was a site that depicted weird imagery and apparently 4 separate audios that were disturbing. And there was another one called Fatherhood, in which it depicted a man screaming at a distressed child in the shower while banging on the shower door. And that one does seem to have some contention in terms of the footage, as there was a channel called World Corp Enterprise Archive claiming that those were created by someone, which I will bring up in a minute. And even Nexpo would be covering this video, making the claim that this could be an ARG, and obviously some of the imagery could lean towards that if you kind of just Google it and see some of the imagery. And if you decide to go to the Ordinary Gamer subreddit, you will find that one user has a re-uploaded piece of Fatherhood and tries to push the idea that it was an ARG, and that he knows the one that made World Corp, which from the looks of it, it seems that they were able to find the group, which was called Autistic Boy Money Clan. And there are claims on the Genius website that World Corp was actually a side project created by one of the members of ABMC by the name of Money Goblin. And it does seem to be plausible, as if you go to their channel, their video art style is very similar to that of World Corp. And even the Reddit of World Corp seems to suggest as much. And in terms of the archive channel, they do have a video that you can argue that the videos are highly likely fake, just based on what he presented on insubordination and basically from photos that he presents from Money Goblin. Now, in terms of the audio, I still wasn't fully convinced, as it mainly focused on the footage. It mainly focused on the footage. It wasn't really covering anything on the audio. And even Mutahar said it in one of the videos that covered World Corp, is that just because the video might be fine doesn't mean we can't ignore the audio.
Now, throughout these people had listened to videos where it was the child being yelled at. Now, I've listened to all 4 of these videos just now, and regardless of if they're fake, it's still a child screaming so realistically that it makes my stomach churn. I mean, even if it's fake to the point where it's uncomfortably real sounding, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? It's regardless of how fake it is, it's not something that I want to hear. It's sick, it's demented, and it's just out there.
Even though the footage is fine and it's like fabricated and they use it as like an artistic thing, that doesn't justify them using possible bad audio, and they never really addressed that. Not the archive channel, not World Corp, or even Money Goblin, as far as I could see. So that's something that really pissed me off, is the fact that they were basically saying that, hey, look, the footage is crafted, it's fake, it's just an art piece, therefore the audio is justified as well. When it's like, I don't know, you didn't cover everything. You need to cover all your bases. Just because you justify one thing, that doesn't justify the whole project. Using possible CP or child harm. That's not okay. That really pisses me off. And I will give some leeway to the archive channel because I think they mentioned that they were under 18. So I guess it's just them not realizing the gravity of possible child harm audio, because they're not exactly in talks with World Corp or Money Goblin, so they can't really clarify. As far as I've seen, they can't really clarify if the audio is, something that they made or if it's from somewhere where they grabbed it. And again, they haven't clarified anything. Archives didn't really cover it. So regardless if it's fake or not, I don't think that's something you should be playing with, especially in this form of manner, because there are ways to execute it. It's just that this is not one of them, which again is no excuse to possibly promote something that you created as art form. Like there's ways to go about it, but this is not one of them. Like an example is that I believe in the third Terrifier movie, there's like an off-screen killing of a child. Like that is a way to do it. Like in terms of people accepting it or not, I don't know, but it's like that is more acceptable than what they did in this project. That's all I'm gonna say. But yeah, like I said, just to end it off, I honestly think it was a project made by some teenagers who thought they were being edgy and cool, for lack of a better word, because I know there was a time where there was channels like Filthy Frank and stuff like that where it's kind of cool to be edgy and to kind of push that thing. But yeah, I think once they got older and they started to realize that maybe what they were presenting wasn't as okay, and maybe they realized that they did have some audio that wasn't okay. Of course, they could always clarify it. They haven't done it yet. Hopefully they do, or at least I haven't been able to find anything. But if they do, then I guess maybe we'll see how that goes. But yeah, as far as I see, I think they just did a little something when they were younger, and obviously they come to regret it now. But yeah, that's how I'll end this section off, and we'll move on to the next one. Fallout 3 Number Station. And this one basically revolves around the myth that you endgame the Galaxy News radio host, 3Dog, and basically have Margaret, the technician, take over as the radio host. In that under certain conditions, GNR will actually become a number station. And for those who don't know what a number station is, it's basically just a station that broadcasts coded messages in the form of numbers. Now, in order to do that, first you actually need to get rid of 3Dog, as apparently it doesn't activate as long as he's still alive in the game, in which after you'll need to skip over a quest and destroy Raven Rock, which will in turn turn GNR into a number station. And in order to hear the number station, you actually need to be in the immediate DC area or in certain points where there's a high enough elevation for you to pick up the signal. And once you tune in, you'll hear the voice of the deceased 3Dog in an out-of-character voice reading the series of numbers in single digits in a series of 9 through 12 numbers, such as
945-420-2010. Accident in the Gulf, several dead. Oil spill apparently averted.
And that will then be followed by a music track. And eventually more messages would pop up and the community would actually begin to collect many more messages, such as when the Queen would pass away or when Britney would win an Oscar. And I think this is less of a conspiracy theory and more of a creepypasta that maybe the creator of the Iceberg found interesting and decided to include it, which I guess makes sense because it is a good creepypasta, because I totally remember this one, back when I was a youngin'. But yeah, I definitely remember this one. It's still good. Biological Resource Center. Now again, this one was a little bit difficult to narrow down, but eventually I was able to find some information on a biological research center in Phoenix, Arizona, in which back in 2014, the FBI would actually raid the center owned by Stephen Gore, who founded the company back in 2004 because he basically became bored of selling insurance. And he would run the business seemingly well up until 2011, where he would actually catch the attention of the FBI as a Detroit-based body broker would actually be caught crossing the border into Canada with severed heads, with some of them being able to be traced back to the BRC. And during their investigation, they would actually find 205 body parts that the broker had on him that were actually traced back to the BRC. And in the case of the BRC, they would actually find that thousands of bodies that were initially donated for research and education would actually be dismembered and sold or leased for commercial purposes. And I think one of the more messed up things about this whole section in the layer is the fact that these body parts had a high chance of being infected with hepatitis, and that because of how little care they put into the bodies, it would have a high chance of putting at risk anybody doing research with those body parts. Like, for example, how Harvard researchers would actually receive a deceased brain and that those researchers wouldn't actually know that that brain was actually infected until 2 years after they did research on it. And if you thought that was it, then you would be wrong, as the BRC would also sell bodies to the US military for $5,893 and would actually use them for ballistic testing, and about 34 of them would actually be used without the permission of the donors. And that 18 out of the 34 cases, they wouldn't even mention or offer the option to give them to the military. And out of the other 16, they would basically show the option, but they explicitly said no to it. And that the other 4 didn't even make a choice. And that the Army would actually find heavily redacted forms or forms signed by an agent of the BRC that indicated consent. And it's more tragic to think about because the people who donated these bodies is that some of them would mostly do it not to be financially burdened, and that the others would do it to contribute to scientific research and not for commercial purposes. And the letter that Gore sent to the judge is actually extremely gross, as he said he never did it for financial gain, but rather a quote-unquote labor of love, and that although he could have hired a qualified medical director, he actually preferred to rely on books and the internet, which, you know, basically makes him a doctor. But there's not much to say on him. He's honestly gross. He looks gross. Bruh. Yeah, that's all I can say. I mean, I guess you could say it was a conspiracy for a while, but, you know, obviously we found it out, and that's all we can say about that. Werehyenas. So the wiki describes werehyenas as a neologism, which is basically the creation of a new word that is analogous to werewolves, and that this would also be classified as a cryptid. But unlike the standard description of werewolves, where the man turns into a creature, werehyenas are actually disguising themselves as humans. And there are some interesting stories from different countries in Africa, like how in Somalia they believe that there is a Quarry Lamaris, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, which is one who rubs himself with a stick, and that is where a man could transform himself into a hyena man by rubbing himself with a magic stick at nightfall, and by repeating this process he could return to his human state before dawn. And in Ethiopia, they believe that every blacksmith, because this skill is passed down from generations, is actually a wizard or a witch, in which they have the power to transform into a hyena, and that they would rob graves at midnight, in which they would then refer to them as a Buddha or a Bouda, and that they would be looked upon with suspicion. And many Ethiopian Christians would actually characterize Ethiopian Jews as being Buddhas, making the claim that they would unearth Christian corpses and basically consume them. And at first, I thought that maybe they just didn't like Jews there, until it was revealed that blacksmiths traditionally over there was the job for Jewish people. So it makes sense that there was some kind of connection to them being looked at with suspicion. And this is kind of funny, at least to me, but apparently Ethiopian Jews are referred to as beta Jews, which is funny that there is a beta form of Jews. I don't know, that's just me, but yeah, I don't know. And in Western Sudan, there would actually be something similar with them having a hybrid creature in which a human will transform and turn into a cannibalistic monsters that would basically go after people, specifically lovers. And that when they're in their human form, they could actually portray themselves as healers, blacksmiths, or even woodcutters. And in Arab folklore, they would actually write about werehyenas, but they would write them more on the vampiric side, in which they would attack at night and basically feed on the necks of the unsuspecting folk with the power to entrance their victim with either their glare, their sight, whatever have you, and their pheromones. And you know, I'm just saying that might be like an interesting Twilight film. Hey, habibi, let me suckle on your neck. We're both dogs, eh? We both got that dog in us. Boy, if you don't get... And for Greece, up until the end of the 19th century, they would actually believe that if you did not destroy the bodies of werewolves, they would actually basically haunt the battlefield and turn into vampiric hyenas that would drink the blood of dying soldiers, which is kind of extreme. One possibility for this could have been that there was a particular species of hyenas that lived near the vicinity of humans that could actually go on two legs like a bear, and that could have been the origins of the stories as far as we know. But also, this one's pretty cool because there's a lot of folklore into it. There's a lot of ideas you could come up with. I know you could probably make one of those cheap films back in the day of the early 2000s and make a movie about werehyenas. That honestly wouldn't be that bad. Omege serial killer. So my initial search would actually lead me to a serial cat murderer by the name of Luca Magnotta, who would eventually kill a person, and they would actually create a Netflix series called don't fuck with cats. And while I was looking at his page, what I was looking for finally showed up. As in May of 2020, while COVID was still running rampant, many people tried to look for ways to distract themselves or to communicate with the outside world. Specifically talking about the furry community on Omege. And for those who forgot what Omege was or never heard of it, it was basically a video chat service in which you could use hashtags to basically get in contact with people who would also use the same hashtags. And the story would start with someone using the furry hashtag on Omege, talking with people until they would eventually connect with a woman who had an animal skin mask holding what seemed to be a skull. And keep in mind, this wasn't a human-sized skull, as it was only a bit bigger than an egg, and it almost looked faked up until the woman used her finger to push out one of the eyeballs. And it was clear to see that this woman wasn't doing this to shock people on the other side, as she would do this intentionally by using hashtags such as furry, fursuit, and furry fandom. And thankfully there's a full story that I'll leave in the description in case you want to take a look at it. This story would start all the way back in 2019, where there was a person using an account by the name of Crystal, in which she would steal furry characters and basically resell them, and that if you called her out, she would get really angry with you. With her using multiple accounts to attack others, with her even using one account claiming to be her own boyfriend to basically defend and harass anyone else that would basically go after her. But going back to the timeline, there would actually be a lot of talk in the furry community, with one post stating that there was claims that there was someone endgaming kittens. Now, the deletion of animals is obviously different than a person, mainly for the fact that it is all online and it's anonymous, and that there is a lot more effort in order to prove that someone is harming any sort of animal, and the fact that police don't generally value animals as highly as humans. Now, the search efforts did manage to find more information about Crystal, learning that she had an interest in taxidermying animals and using road-killed gophers or anything from a natural death, and that at this time you could probably make the case of plausible deniability. And just giving you a fair warning that this part is a little gross when it involves animals, so if you don't want to listen to it, I will just kind of add a timestamp so you can just skip through it. But as time would pass, there would be stories of, pets being adopted with their ex-owners later receiving photos of their pets now deceased, and even one story of a headless dog found near a cornfield where she lived, and a few other disgusting things that I will not mention, that basically showed that there was no way to directly link it towards her, but obviously there were suspicions that it was her, but there was just no evidence to point towards her. And it wasn't until July 14th, 2020 where she would be arrested by the FBI on the count of federal animal cruelty and 2 counts of making and distributing crushed videos involving animals, which is really disgusting and extremely sad. And this would be a good end to this part, but I kind of want to explain how she even got caught in the first place. And that apparently the Kokomo PD was entirely fucking useless during this time, before the FBI even got involved, because they generally thought it was a hoax. And if it wasn't for the FBI in a different state getting involved, who knows how many animals she would have hurt. Mostly because there were calls on Facebook about the abuse, and once she knew that she could get away with it, she started live streaming everything. Eventually they would go to her house and they would find the bodies of deceased animals, but they didn't do anything because they didn't have footage of the killings, which makes no sense to me. And thanks to Crystal's own stupidity, she would actually mislead investigators in Boise, Idaho, who would open up a case on her, and I would actually track her Instagram account and eventually find out that she was out of state in Indiana. And Crystal would keep posting videos up until July 8th, which is when a federal warrant led to her arrest. And I want to give a quick shout out to Dogpatch Press for having all this information well documented. Aurora Woods incident. So from the looks of it, this actually seems to be a parody creepypasta from the Heaven Stairway incident. And for those who don't know the origins of that, it's basically a troll face meme in which we know that oil floats in water and we basically wait for it to rain, and then we go to the realization that, our body produces oil, therefore that is the stairway to heaven. And that meme would actually spread without context on a post on 4chan, with it mentioning how in 2001 an oil tanker would actually crash at an intersection in New York City, splashing the New York residents in oil, and it was raining very heavily on that day, so therefore they would float up into the sky during the thunderstorm until the rain stopped, and therefore they would fall to their deaths, with it being reported that 24 would actually pass away. But back on topic, the Aurora Woods incident would actually be a 4-page trollface comic in which the character gets lost in the woods, leading to the event known as the Aurora Woods incident of August of 2021. And I would end it there because there's not much information on it besides it being just a meme, but seeing as someone made a creepypasta on Reddit, I'm just going to read it for you because I'm trying to maintain retention time, and I mean, I have nothing better to do, so, why not give it to you? Plus, it's pretty short.
I was jorking it in the woods when I finds myself in front of Larry.
Police report, 1822C, August 28, 2001. Aurora Woods incident. File 639 ATH. This report contains sensitive material. Discretion is advised. The Aurora Woods incident was an incident taking place in an area known as Aurora Woods northwest of Crestone, Colorado. The suspect's name is John Michael Astor, a mechanic working on Mason's Auto Body Shop on 97th Street. The suspect didn't expect a sign of deranged behavior prior to the incident and was well liked by his coworkers. The suspect reportedly was an avid hunter and spent his time outside of the woods hunting and hiking. On the 13th of August, 2021, the suspect had gone missing and was not seen for several days. A search party was conducted to search for suspects. The search party consisted of 11 men with 2 dogs. They returned empty-handed on the 22nd of August, and the search was called off, and John was presumed dead. 24 hours after the search was called off, police dispatch Mary Johnson received an urgent phone call calling from someone claiming to be the John in question. He said, "I killed them. Now what? I really did kill them. Blood is everywhere. God, please help me." The suspect then hung up. 2 squad cars were sent out to 635 Maryvale Grove on the outskirts of Crestone. What the officers encountered was nothing short of a brutal massacre. An officer remarked that it was like Satan himself amassed in this house and ripped the occupants one by one into pieces, showing no mercy. The officer had asked to remain anonymous. A trail of blood was found in the backyard leading to the woods. Law enforcement began another search, screaming through megaphones in an effort to convince the suspect to turn himself in. He never responded. The series of events reached its peak in the Aurora Woods incident, in which 12 officers in the search group went missing on the 25th of August, 2001. These officers were discovered brutally mutilated and arranged in a ritual-like circle. A statewide manhunt was still in action, and the suspect was still missing. Many eyewitness reports have surfaced claiming that a creature of sorts now inhabits John's body and stalks the treetops of Aurora Woods. Crestone, Colorado has now declared martial law, and all occupants are ordered to stay indoors and lock all doors and windows, such as chimneys, crawl spaces leading to outside, cellar door, etc. Sergeant Robert, Colorado State Police. And I'm just going to leave it off as there is no definitive story to the Aurora Woods incident, so it could be left to interpretation. Not to mention that if you feel like creating a story involving that, then you can go right ahead. Modern serial killers. Now, this one is kind of interesting as we don't really hear much about serial killers anymore, at least in the more modern times. With someone making the point that we hear a lot more of the infamous ones, such as the Zodiac Killer, Ted Bundy, the Night Stalker, the Golden Gate Killer, and how we haven't really heard about anyone in the last 10 to 15 years. And the most logical answer to that is that we've actually made major improvements in forensic science, policing, and overall technology that involves with us catching any potential murderers. With the data even showing that in the 1980s, because of crackdowns on crimes, it actually made it more difficult to do that sort of crime. And it really is impressive how far we've gone, as before we weren't able to obtain DNA from hair, but now we are able to, and that the requirement to get any sort of DNA is significantly reduced. And how now we're able to collect and build a database of DNA similar to criminals that could narrow down their search and possibly lead to a future culprit. And how in today's world, schools have developed better tools for kids who are experiencing things that help them to cope with past traumas or to have them develop better emotional control. And this is interesting when you think of it as a conspiracy, but once you kind of look into the data and to kind of see why we don't really hear about modern serial killers, it kind of makes sense, especially when there was that one guy who killed that one girl, but it became like big news and then it went away really quickly because they were able to gather so much information. And we reached the end of the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. This was a long one. This was a long recording session. I was planning on doing this, at least at the time of the recording, I was doing it yesterday. At least I had planned to do that, but I've been playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and I've got distracted. So I did it on this day. Hopefully I'm getting it out as soon as I can. And I just want to say I apologize in a certain sense, because at least when I seen the beginning of my videos, I'm not used to, like, it's all new to me trying to talk to the camera and stuff like that, and I can see it during my recordings and stuff like that, that I'm still not comfortable talking to a camera, because it's kind of weird to describe it, because you might just see me, you know, talking to you, but yeah, I'm just not used to talking to a camera. I'm not very, it doesn't feel the same as talking to a person, if that makes any sense. But I'm getting used to it. I'm trying to become more charismatic, more talkative, stuff like that. So hopefully I get better as time goes on, so that way it seems like, you know, I'm refining my skills. That's all I'm trying to say. But in terms of videos, I still have the next episode already recorded for the Fears to Fathom. I might start recording a little bit more gameplay and stuff like that, just because, like I said before, they're easy to record, they're easy to put out, so that way, you know, if you're kind of waiting for something from me, then I could probably just post those and make it easier. I already have a project that I'm working on right now. It's going to be another missing persons case, so you can look forward to that, and I think that's how it's going to go. Like, I'll see what I can create. I have a few ideas, but, you know, I'm never going to definitively say anything, because, you know me, I have a bad upload schedule. But yeah, that's about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this Iceberg. But yeah, I think that's it. To anyone new, hello. If you want to watch any of, you know, my other stuff, you're free to do that. I try to be versatile. I try to create a bunch of different content. For those who have already been here long enough, they know that I don't tend to just stick with one topic. I'll always upload something kind of in the variety, so that way if they don't want something specific, then I'll upload something else. But yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Without further ado, I'm gonna go eat, and then I'm gonna go play Kingdom Come Deliverance for probably a couple of hours until morning. But yeah, that's about it. I hope you guys have a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good night. Until next time, take care.